The morning my daughter-in-law told me to cancel my gym membership because I was spending money on luxuries, I was standing in my own kitchen. The kitchen I had paid for. The kitchen where I had cooked 300 Sunday dinners for a family that had quietly decided I was no longer worth the inconvenience of gratitude. I did not say anything that morning. I poured my coffee, nodded slowly, and watched her leave through the side door. But something shifted in me that day, something small and quiet, like the first crack in ice before the whole surface gives way. My name is Margaret, and I am 67 years old. I live in Barrie, Ontario, in the same house I bought with my husband before he passed. This is not a story about bitterness. I want to be clear about that from the beginning. This is a story about the day I finally understood the difference between love and funding someone else's life. I retired 3 years ago after 31 years as an administrative coordinator with the Simcoe County School Board. My pension comes every 2 weeks, direct deposit, reliable as the seasons. It is not a lavish amount, but it is enough, or it was enough, before I let it quietly become everyone else's lifeline. My son Daniel is 41 years old. He works in project management for a mid-size construction firm in the GTA, and his wife, Courtney, does something in marketing. I say something because, in 11 years of marriage, I never once received a clear answer when I asked. They have 2 children, my grandchildren, Theo and Isla, who are 9 and 7, and who I love more than any words I know how to arrange. Daniel and I were always close. After his father passed, it was the 2 of us for a long time, and I think that closeness made it easy for me to confuse financial support with emotional connection. When he called, I answered. When he needed something, I provided. It felt like love. It was love. But somewhere along the way, what began as help became expectation, and expectation became entitlement, and entitlement became a woman standing in my kitchen telling me my gym membership was a luxury. I need to tell you how it started, because it did not start dramatically. These things never do. It began 11 years ago, the year Daniel and Courtney got married. They had found a townhouse in Mississauga, a nice area, close to his office, but the rent was higher than they had anticipated. Daniel called and explained the situation carefully, the way he always did when he needed something. He had a way of making requests sound like reasonable conclusions you had both arrived at together. He said they were between paychecks, that the deposit was due, that it would just be this once. I transferred $800 that evening. The next month, there was a car insurance bill that had slipped through the cracks. The month after that, Courtney's dental work not covered, she said, by their plan, though I later learned she had no plan because they had declined the optional benefits at her workplace to save money on premiums each month. I paid the dentist directly, $2,200. These are the ones I remember clearly. There were others I have since lost track of, folded into years of transfers and e-transfers and the occasional check left on the counter when they visited for the holidays. But I kept track. That is the part I want you to understand. I kept a small notebook green cover, college ruled, bought at the Dollarama on Dunlop Street, and I wrote down every single payment. Not because I intended to demand it back. I wrote it down because somewhere inside me, the part that had spent 31 years organizing budgets and coordinating department schedules, knew that numbers matter, details matter, the record matters. By the time Theo was born, I had made 43 transfers. By the time Isla started junior kindergarten, that number had climbed to 91. When Courtney told me to cancel my gym membership, the notebook had reached 112 entries. The gym membership comment was not the first thing she had said that made me go quiet inside. There had been others. There was the Thanksgiving when she told me, in front of Daniel and the children, that my house smelled like old carpet and lavender, in the tone people use when they want to insult you and maintain the ability to claim it was a neutral observation. There was the Christmas, when I gave Theo a wooden train set handmade from a craft market in Collingwood, and Courtney held it at arm's length and said she would have to find space for it. There was the afternoon I offered to babysit so they could go to a concert, and she said no thank you. They had already arranged someone being a 20-year-old neighbor she had apparently decided was more suitable. None of these things alone would have broken anything, but they accumulated the way water does in a basement, slowly, invisibly, until one morning you step off the bottom stair and your feet are wet. After the gym membership comment, I sat down that evening with my green notebook and I counted 112 entries. Not all the same amount. Some were small, $40 here, $70 there, some were significant. The largest single transfer was $4,300, sent the spring they had a leak in their ceiling, and the landlord disputed responsibility, and they needed a contractor immediately. I had sent it before I had finished my morning tea. I added the column. Then I added it again because I did not believe the first total, $49,280. Over 11 years. To two adults with two professional incomes living in a rented townhouse in Mississauga while I lived alone in Barrie and clipped coupons at the Zares on Bayfield. I sat with that number for a long time. I did not feel anger at first. I felt something closer to confusion, the specific confusion of a person who looks at a map and realizes the path they have been walking has been taking them in a direction they never chose. I thought about the trip to Portugal I had been talking about since my retirement. I thought about the bathroom renovation I had postponed twice. I thought about the TFSA contributions I had skipped in years when money felt tight, which I now understood had not been tight at all, only redirected. I closed the notebook. I did not make any decisions that night. What I did instead was start paying attention in a way I had not allowed myself to before. Over the following weeks, I noticed things. I noticed that Daniel and Courtney had taken a trip to Mexico in January. I had seen the photos on Facebook, the resort pool, the cocktails. Courtney, in a wide-brimmed hat with a smile, I had never seen her direct at me. I noticed that Courtney had recently purchased a new SUV, which I knew because Daniel had mentioned it in passing and seemed proud of it. I noticed that when I visited for Isla's birthday in March, there was a new sectional sofa in their living room and a television on the wall that was larger than the one I had in my own house, the house I owned. I am not a petty woman. I did not begrudge them nice things. What I began to sit with was a simpler and more uncomfortable question. If they could afford Mexico and a new SUV and a sectional sofa, what exactly had the $49,000 been for? I did not ask Daniel this question directly. I knew how that conversation would go. He would become quietly defensive, the way he did when he felt cornered, and Courtney would find a reason to be in the other room but positioned close enough to the doorway to monitor the exchange. Nothing would be resolved. Something would be damaged. Instead, I did something I had never done before. I stopped sending money. Not dramatically. I did not send a message. I did not make an announcement. I simply waited. The first call came 6 weeks later. It was Daniel, and he mentioned carefully that they were dealing with some unexpected expenses and were wondering if I might be able to help with a short-term thing. He used the word short-term twice in 30 seconds. I said I was sorry to hear that, and that I hoped things sorted themselves out, and that I loved him and would call him Sunday. Then I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a moment, listening to the particular silence of a house where only one person lives, and all the decisions belong to her. The second call came from Courtney, which surprised me. She did not usually call directly. She was brisk and bright in the way she was when she wanted something. The performance of warmth deployed strategically, the laugh a little too ready, the interest in my life a little too sudden. She asked how I was, asked about my garden, asked whether I was still doing my Thursday walking group. Then she mentioned casually, as though it had just occurred to her, that they had a property tax bill coming up, and cash flow was difficult that month, and she knew I had mentioned not having many expenses these days. I had never told her my expenses. I had certainly never described them as minimal. I said I was managing carefully on my pension and wished them well with the bill. She was quiet for a moment, in a way that felt different from ordinary quiet. Then she said, "I just thought, given everything you've contributed over the years, that you'd want to continue being part of things." Part of things. I recognized it immediately for what it was, a door held slightly open, the implication that if I stopped paying, I stopped belonging, that the relationship I thought I had with my grandchildren, with my son, with the life they all lived together in that townhouse, was conditional on the direct deposit arriving on time. I thanked her for calling. I hung up. I want to tell you what happened in the weeks after that, because this is the part nobody warns you about. Stopping is not simple. It is not a single decision made cleanly and then done. It is a decision you make again every morning when you wake up and feel the pull of old habit, the very specific guilt of a mother who spent decades believing that her worthiness was expressed through what she could provide. I called my doctor and had a full checkup, partly because I had been putting it off, and partly because I needed to know, for my own clarity, that I was thinking straight. I sat in her office on Collier Street, and I told her, simply, that I had recently made a significant financial change and was experiencing some emotional difficulty with it, and could she refer me to someone if I needed it. She looked at me for a moment, and then said, "Margaret, you're the most clear-headed patient I've seen this week." That helped. I also called my sister in Sudbury, who is 3 years older than me, and has never once in her life given money to anyone who did not need it with genuine and verifiable urgency. She listened to the whole thing. When I finished, she said, "What took you so long?" I laughed. It was the first real laugh I had managed in weeks. I changed my bank account notifications so that I would receive alerts for any unusual activity. I updated my will not in anger, not as a message, but because I had not looked at it in 4 years, and it was simply the responsible thing to do. I spoke with a financial advisor at my branch on Dunlop, who helped me understand exactly where I stood and what my pension would realistically support for the rest of my life. The picture was not dire. It was, in fact, considerably more stable than I had allowed myself to believe, because I had spent 11 years absorbing anxiety about money that was not mine to absorb. The calls from Daniel and Courtney became less frequent, then stopped for a period that lasted almost 2 months. In that silence, I did several things. I booked the bathroom renovation. I reinstated my gym membership and added a water aerobics class on Wednesday mornings. I looked at flights to Lisbon, and I waited to see what the silence would eventually become. What I did not expect was the phone call on a Wednesday evening in November from a number I recognized as Daniel's cell, but with a voice that told me immediately something was different. He sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. He said, "Mom, I need to talk to you, and I need you to know that I'm not calling to ask for anything." I sat down. He talked for a long time. He told me that the lease on the townhouse had come up for renewal, and the landlord had raised the rent substantially. Not an unusual situation in the GTA, as many people know. He told me that they had looked at their finances with fresh eyes, for the first time in what he described as a shamefully long time, and that what they found there had been difficult to sit with. He said that when they mapped out what they had actually spent money on over the last several years and looked at what my contributions had essentially absorbed, he felt something he was struggling to name out loud. He tried twice and then said, "I think it's shame, Mom. I think that's the word." I did not tell him about the notebook. I did not tell him the total. That was not something he needed to carry, and it was not a weapon I had any interest in using. What I told him was that I loved him. that I had always loved him, that nothing about any of this changed that, and that what I needed from him, what I had always needed, without knowing how to ask for it, was simply to be treated as a person whose life had value outside of what I could transfer into his account. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I know. I know that now." We spoke for over an hour. It was the most honest conversation we had had since the years before Courtney, before the townhouse in Mississauga, before all of it. At the end, he asked if he could bring the children up to Barrie on the weekend. I said yes, of course. I said I would make the butter chicken I used to make when he was young, the one from the recipe I had clipped from a Canadian living magazine so many years ago that the paper had gone soft at the edges. He said, "I'll tell Theo and Isla. They've been asking about you." I stayed at the kitchen table after we hung up, and I sat there for a while in the dark, not feeling sad, not feeling triumphant, just feeling the specific and unfamiliar weight of having finally taken up the space that had always belonged to me. I did not book Portugal for that spring. I booked it for the fall, which felt more like mine, the light in October, the slower pace, the version of the trip I had always imagined, rather than the rushed compromise I might have taken out of guilt. I also finished the bathroom renovation. Heated floors, a rainfall showerhead, a deep soaker tub I had seen in a magazine and circled with a pen 3 years ago, and then set aside because the money had gone somewhere else. It is mine now, every tile, every fitting, every quiet morning, when I fill that tub with hot water and sit in the steam and remember that I earned this 31 years of work, 31 years of showing up, 31 years of being responsible and steady and present, and that no one on earth has the right to tell me to live with less of what I have built. The last time I saw Courtney, she was polite in the way people are when they understand the rules of a game have changed and they are no longer winning. She asked about my renovation with what sounded like genuine curiosity. I told her about the tiles. She nodded. We stood in that particular space that exists between people who will never be close, but have agreed, for the sake of the people they both love, to be kind. I can live in that space. I have lived in harder ones. What I want to say, to anyone who might be listening and recognizing something in this story, something in the notebook, something in the quiet transfers, something in the gym membership comment, or whatever your particular version of that moment was, is this: the money was never the whole point. The money was just the clearest measure of a belief I had carried for too long, the belief that love must be earned through provision, that belonging must be purchased, that the moment you stop giving is the moment you stop mattering. That belief is not true. I know that now with the certainty I usually reserve for things I have seen with my own eyes. I matter. My pension is mine. My soaker tub is mine. My trip to Lisbon, where I will sit at a cafe near the water and drink something I have never tasted and watch the light come off the river in the way I have been imagining for years, that is mine too. I am 67 years old. I live in Barrie, Ontario. I have a heated bathroom floor and a green notebook I no longer need to write in, and I have never, in my entire life, felt more like myself than I do right now.